and then disgustingly today trying to play petty politics on the backs of people with disabilities. That's shameful, Mr. Chair, and Canadians won't forget it.
Are hitting all the good notes today, bad notes, but they're focusing on what they should be as opposition. All the things that their holes are missing, and this is what we need them for. Watch this.
The question goes to the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Scheer. Mr. Scheer.
Mr. Chair, today the Prime Minister is shamefully misleading Canadians, trying to shirk responsibility for his failures in providing help for people with disabilities. He is letting people with disabilities down. He is the one who waited months before bringing proposals forward to help people with disabilities. And then yesterday, when Conservatives proposed a motion to have Parliament meet to debate this legislation, it was Liberals who said no. So can the Deputy Prime Minister explain why Liberals refused to allow the House to debate this bill yesterday?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very glad to hear that question because it allows me to make an offer to the Conservative Party to correct what may well have been an honest mistake they made in the parliamentary hurly-burly yesterday. Yesterday, a clear opportunity was offered to all members of this House to have a vote specifically and narrowly on the question of whether we would offer Canadians with disabilities up to $600 of additional.
I'll go back to Mr. Scheer.
Was Liberals shamefully saying no to allow Parliament to deal with that legislation, and then disgustingly today trying to play petty politics on the backs of people with disabilities. That's shameful, Mr. Chair, and Canadians won't forget it. Monsieur le Président.
Chair, yesterday, the Globe and Mail revealed that the Minister of Foreign Affairs has 2 mortgages valued at over $1 million with the state-owned Bank of China. Does the Prime Minister believe it is appropriate for his foreign minister to be so personally indebted to the Communist Party of Canada? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
What is shameful is to allow partisan politics and procedural maneuvering to stop Canadians with disabilities who are truly facing additional challenges because of coronavirus. What is shameful and indeed disgusting is to prevent those Canadians from getting that $600. Members of other parties were prepared to support that measure, and in good faith, we would be very prepared to have that vote and allow us all to get that money to Canadians and to fight about other issues.
Go to Mr. Scheer. Mr. Scheer.
Well, Mr. Chair, she must have been talking about herself and her own party during her response, and Conservatives stand ready. The second she wants to recall Parliament, we will be here to get the help that Canadians expect. But the question was about another Liberal minister getting into trouble because of a fancy European property. This time, it's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Monsieur Champagne, who owns 2 posh apartments in London and owes an arm of the Chinese government over $1 million. Does the Deputy Prime Minister think it's appropriate to have a Minister of the Crown owing an arm of the Chinese government over $1 million?
All right, in the forces, there's this thing that's called undue influence, and I believe it's $50,000. So anyone who you owe $50,000 to or you're indebted too much, it's called undue influence, and it makes you susceptible to espionage and all these other things like that because of that. Now, this guy, just because he disclosed it, is it
the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Minister Champagne disclosed those 2 mortgages along with all other liabilities and assets to the Ethics Commissioner, and they have placed in the online public registry since the minister entered politics. It has been clearly disclosed. Everyone is aware of it, including all relevant government agencies and our Ethics Commissioner, and Canadians have all the transparency they need and deserve.
Mr. Scheer.
Simple question for the Deputy Prime Minister. Has Mr. Champagne's mortgages come up for renewal since he has been a Member of Parliament?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while I, of course, am extremely familiar with all of the positions our government takes on foreign policy, I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the details of the personal finance.
Go back to Mr. Scheer now. Mr. Scheer.
It's a relevant point because if he was a sitting member of Parliament when the mortgage came up for renewal and he decided to renew with the bank that is run by the Communist Party of China, the negotiations and the dealings around that would be very, very relevant. Will the Minister of Foreign Affairs disclose what interest rate he is being charged for the 2 mortgages on his 2 London flats?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, since the Conservatives have chosen to go into matters of personal finance and property arrangements of members of this House, I might point out that of the 2 people exchanging ideas right now, one of us lives in government property.
Maintenant, nous allons continuer.
We are now.
Is so troubling, right? Because you ask the question assuming there is a moral equivalency between what takes place in these countries where they repress their people and they bludgeon their people and they burn down their religious facilities.
To equate Scheer having a Canadian given house because he's leader of opposition to the Communist Party giving a $1.2 million loan with, we hear, low interest rates. That's undue influence.
Continue with Mr. Schmale. Mr. Schmale.
Thank you, Committee Chair. Last night, the Globe and Mail revealed that the Minister of Foreign Affairs has 2 mortgages valued at nearly $2 million with the state-owned Bank of China. What interest rate is Minister Champagne paying?
The Honourable Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The Minister lived many years in the UK and he purchased 2 apartments in London, one in 2009, the other one in 2013, which he continues to own. And since entering politics, the 2 mortgages and other liabilities and assets have been fully disclosed.
Mail.
Does the Prime Minister believe it's appropriate for his Foreign Minister to be so personally indebted to the Communist Party of China?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, as I said, Mr. Speaker, the 2 mortgages and other liabilities have been fully disclosed to the Ethics Commissioners and placed into the online public registry. Mr. Speaker, everything's public.
Mr. Schmale.
Committee Chair, the Foreign Minister is required to obtain a high security clearance, not only to attend Cabinet, but because he has access to some of Canada's most secret intelligence. Can the Prime Minister explain how his minister obtained the security clearance, given his financial obligations to the Communist Party of China?
Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this could be long. As I said earlier, that since entering politics, the 2 mortgages and liabilities and assets have been fully disclosed to the Ethics Commissioner. Fully disclosed, Mr. Speaker, and placed on the online public registry. Everything's public.
Mr. Schmale.
The Minister has placed himself in a blatant conflict of interest. It's absolutely inappropriate for him to have a financial relationship with a Chinese government-owned bank. Will the Minister immediately remove himself from this conflict and find a new bank to do business with?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, that's a little bit far-fetched, Mr. Speaker. I thought this was a important meeting to discuss the pandemic and important things that related to the life of Canadians, creations of jobs, saving jobs, helping Canadians across the country.
Mr. Schmale.
I'm going to ask the same question. I'm going to have to repeat the same answer.
Committee Chair, there seems to be a real conflict of interest here. Maybe the question should be, is this why Minister Champagne could barely say thank you to Taiwan for the medical supplies they sent us?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, everything has been fully disclosed to the Ethics Commissioner, placed online on the public registry. Everything is public, Mr. Speaker. It is fully public.
Mr. Schmale.
Thank you, Speaker. 2 Canadians have been jailed in China since 2018. Is the Minister of Global Affairs working to free them, or is this conflict hampering those efforts?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the honourable member that the 2 Canadians remain our absolute priority, and we are going to continue to tirelessly work to secure their immediate release and to stand up for them as a government, as Canadians.
Go back to Mr. Schmale. Mr. Schmale.
Thank you, Committee Chair. We're going to switch gears here. Speaker, Conservatives are on record in support of the development and implementation.
Okay, MP Schmel brings up a good point. I looked into this a while ago about Indigenous women and that report about missing women, and there's some scary things. The open source, the police were saying about it, and there's nothing been done about it. And be careful what you research, because sometimes the
I'd like
evil
to ask
looks
that
back.
many businesses in my riding, especially those that opened up recently, do not qualify for any government support. They are ready to open, they're ready to hire employees, but they're not getting the support that they need. Why won't this government support those businesses?
The Honourable Minister, in 15 seconds or less, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I have too little time to answer that question, and many of my colleagues would be able to answer it really well, because we are doing everything we need to do to go through this crisis together.
Shouldn't be saying this, but a lot of Indigenous people, women, are susceptible because they come from the country, you know, the rural, where a lot of reserves are, and their family doesn't go to the city a lot to visit them or anything like that, because they're from the country in the distance. And that makes them susceptible, and there's not many or enough groups in the city to be watching out for them. And so these other negative groups know this and attack them because of that, and there's a lot more, way worse. I won't even talk about. Now, because of that rural city thing, once they run to the city, all these issues happen. Now there's reports of them being targeted, specifically targeted by groups because of all of this. Now, why isn't Canada the government doing about it? Trudeau says all for everybody. Well, this is something that is known. It's a known entity. They're known they're being targeted, and there's a lot of bad information. And I almost don't recommend anyone looking into it unless you want to cry. And it's awful, horrible stuff. Leave your comments down below. And all right, this is unscripted and impromptu. It's just a subject that touched me really closely. How bad and how prevalent it is in Canadian society, and we need to deal with it. So maybe they are doing something about it. I don't know, but to me it doesn't seem like there's anything doing it overtly. I'm not aware of its presence, and nor should I really be, but I think this needs to be out in the front in everyone's faces all the time. These issues are something that's probably ongoing, I would imagine. Next part. Taking $1.2 million from the Communist Party of China when you're a civilian, yeah, that's fine. But as soon as you become foreign minister, and this foreign minister would not thank Taiwan for like millions in dollars of mass that they gave us. Well, we know why now. It's 110% because he owes China. And I don't care what anyone says. That's a fact. He is totally on. And I was wondering myself, why is he so China-centric? And Trudeau came out, and when they asked him, I'll give him kudos for this, well, I don't often. They asked him, he said, I'll thank Taiwan right away. He didn't blink. He didn't blink before he spoke. And I think what he was doing was covering up for his foreign affairs minister. In a way, maybe he was unaware of all that money that he had. Just because he disclosed it doesn't mean it passes the smell test. That guy needs to resign. He needs to disclose everything or resign. One of these two, because this is unbelievable. Look at the readership on the Globe and Mail upped huge because of it. So obviously Canadians like it. Leave your comments down below and have a good night.
When you start violating your standards quicker than you can lower them, then it's time to go away.